Hi, hello, and welcome to X Team Live event. And thank you all for joining us today. As the topic that we're going to talk about unconventional gaming technology. And for today, our host, and maybe you already know him, it's Ahmed Maawy, and he's our X Team Guardian, which means that he's a technical interviewer, he's a software engineer, but also he's a gaming developer who is currently doing his personal projects, and he's also developing his game engine. So this is interesting. Welcome, Ahmed.
Hey, how are you guys?
Well, Ahmed, first of all, thank you so much for taking this time to talk about this quite interesting topic. And
Yeah.
obviously, I think for those who are joining us, they have the same question like, why the unconventional gaming technologies? What are the conventional, and why did you choose this other path?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I've been a tinkerer for a very long time. Been a software engineer for a while, but the thing is that I've always been playing around with different types of technologies, and just exploring what's out there, right? And what I came to discover is that there's a whole world in gaming that people don't necessarily understand that's really potential and it's really upcoming. That's just not part of the norm. And we're going to discuss a bit about the pros and cons of the conventional methods later, also. But um, I didn't just explore; I also sort of really fell in love with these unconventional methods. That I had a passion for them. And we're going to discover a bit about that later.
Awesome. So, without further ado, I will leave Ahmed to start our wonderful presentation.
Yeah, you're going to leave me to my devices anyway. Yeah, so. Uh, the unconventional game technologies, the technologies that are not really just the normal technologies everyone sort of has exposure to, isn't it? Like everyone just when anyone wants to get into gaming, they always have this technology that they select, right? But before we proceed to talk about these unconventional technologies, let's talk about what are the types of technologies that are used to develop games, which are in two broad categories. There's a game engine and there's a game framework. Now, um, this is going to provide context for the coming slides. Game engines are holistic pieces of software when it comes to developing games. They've got everything embedded, right? They've got an integrated development environment, which is a visual environment that allows you to sort of like visually express your game in a visual manner, even like coding environments, all that. And they also have tools to do different other types of things. This includes tools to integrate with what's known as native plugins. They've got tools to also, export your games and to publish your games to different types of platforms. By platforms, we mean different types of operating systems. There's desktop, there's web, there's mobile, there's consoles. These are all different types of platforms, right? So a game engine is holistic in nature, which is different from a game framework. A game framework is a subset of a game engine. In fact, game engines, one of the components they have is the game framework itself. The game framework is like just the core, like backend developers would call it the backend system. It's a very core technology that enables a game to function. But then a game framework is just like a set of libraries and SDKs. You don't have like a holistic environment. You don't have like sometimes even visual development environments. Even if they're there, they're very limited in capabilities. And basically it's just up to you sometimes to even create ways that you can publish your games. You can sort of like a lot of things are actually quite manual when you're using a framework. So so a game engine, part of the game engine is the framework. So now you understand how these things fall into place. Um, and what are the two common technologies that folks sort of like always go for when they start gaming? And it's because they're very prominent. Also, it's because like all the jobs are there, and all that stuff. You're going to find that people go for Unity and they go for Unreal Engine, right? Unity is a very famous engine. It's C sharp. It's in fact, I think more. I believe it is more popular than Unreal Engine itself. It is in fact more popular. If you look at statistics, it is more popular compared to Unreal Engine itself. And it's because the tool sets for Unity for creating games are easier to use than Unreal Engine. And Unreal Engine goes for the very sophisticated, what we call AAA titles. For games which are like the top-notch games, the 3D games, you're talking about like the very complicated, what can I say, the very complicated games that run on high-end consoles and, PCs and all that, AAA titles. So Unreal Engine is more of like very suited for AAA titles and very sophisticated games. And that is really something that people want to develop sometimes. Well, most of the times they want to develop simple 2D games, or less, they want to create a AAA game, but it doesn't have to be as sophisticated in terms of its capability and graphics. Unreal Engine is also very, very heavy technology when you're talking about the requirements it needs on RAM, the requirements it needs on your processor. So it makes it also a lot more difficult to work with. And you have to have very strong hardware. I mean, even Unity suffers the same problem for very low-end machines. It's not very friendly for that. We're going to talk a bit about that also. So the pros of using conventional game engines is that they're battle tested. They have an amazing portfolio of games, which are hit titles. So people trust them because they've been able to deliver, even on consoles, even on mobile, even on in terms of web games, all sort of like variety of platforms. They've been able to deliver games that have been successful, and they have amazing tooling support. As I mentioned, game engines are holistic, but when you're looking at the conventional technologies compared to the non-conventional technologies, these conventional game engines actually have a lot more tools for you to perform what you want to perform. You want to like integrate ads. There's ads from different vendors already natively available. There's like very good support for, even consoles, even like, different types of platforms that are not, the normal platforms. You're going to talk about sometimes even Apple TV and all these things. You won't find that, you'll find that the conventional game engines are very good at supporting a wide variety of also platforms. And huge communities of developers, I mean, it's a no-brainer because of the fact that there's too many people who use these conventional technologies. The community becomes strong, it becomes huge, right? So apart from the fact that they're very well documented, there's a lot of knowledge base people can benefit from, and people can bounce ideas a lot more, isn't it? I mean, the value of community is not something I can explain more to a developer. Developers know the value of development communities, So, and as I mentioned, comprehensive sets of tools to develop and to export and to publish games onto desktop platforms, mobile platforms, web platforms, console platforms, and other popular game stores. So, but one of also the reasons why I decided to go with the non-conventional and open source types of technologies is that, first of all, you're going to find that the conventional technologies have proprietary licensing, for instance. Like, for instance, if you're making a specific amount of revenue, then you have to pay for licenses and all that stuff, and also the closed source, or some of them are quite, what can I say? Some of them are quite close. So some of them are like Unreal Engine is open source to some degree, but very limited in terms of what you can do with it, isn't it? As a software itself. Closed source means that, especially in the context of Unity, you can't really just, all right, let me just mute my Slack 1 second. Just, all right, sure. Great. Okay, so one of the things about, for instance, Unity, you're going to find is that it's closed source. You can't easily just take its source code and modify it, and and sort of like do with it what you want to do, which is something that open source engines, I'm going to talk about this, which are part of the unconventional technologies that you can do with, is you can actually like have control of the base of the software itself. And if there's something in the code that you didn't like, or you want to fix a bug, you can do that if you have the correct skills to do that. It's not for everyone, but people who are capable can be able to do that, and you can contribute your fixes back to the product itself. Also, especially in the context of Unreal Engine, it's very bulky for just simple machines to run, right? So majority of people who have the simple machines, they can't run an engine like Unreal Engine, and sometimes even struggle with Unity, even if Unity is much better, right? So let's talk now about what are the available options in terms of the two categories we had covered earlier, which is game engines and game frameworks. All right. Let's start with game engines, right? And in fact, for some of you who know about the gaming space, this is not Godot is not something that you can say is unconventional, but still, it's an alternative that not so many people are using. So I mean, Godot is starting to become popular nowadays, right? But it used to be an unconventional game technology, but slowly starting to make its way up, and it's starting to actually have features that are quite, what can I say, they're quite strong for a tool of its caliber, right? Although it doesn't get to the capabilities, you can't compare the capabilities of this engine to obviously like a Unity or Unreal, right? But it does both 2D and 3D, and it has its own language known as GDScript. And it can also do C#. Although at the moment with the latest version 4, C# is lagging behind, but it's catching up. And you can also decide to code in C++, but obviously C++ is not something that straight from the IDE itself, like you can do that. Like you have to have techniques to be able to compile your code and, have it run within the scope of your game itself. It's a bit more of a complicated process, but it does support you to create C++ for your games, and it's very high performance when you do that. I mean, one of the things about Godot engine is it's very lightweight also. Like you download the very core product and it's very lightweight. It can run on machines that, have 4 gigabytes of RAM, very low capacity machines. And it can also do AAA titles starting with Godot 4. I'd love to hear from some of you if you had experience or if you heard about Godot later, but let's talk about other technologies now. The other one that's, there's so many game engines that are open source, but I just selected the ones that I think are worth talking about, right? Based on the portfolio that I have, maybe like what has impressed me personally, right? The other one is Stride, which is trying to exactly emulate something like Unity the way it works. And it's 3D only, but it doesn't, it's not very good at 2D. I mean, it can barely handle 2D. It's also C#, and it's mostly built for 3D, but it's very strong for 3D games, right? And it's got a code editor. It's got like a lot of tooling with itself. But at the moment, what I've seen about Stride is that you can only export the game to desktop, to web, and to mobile. Like beyond that, there isn't much options. But I'm sure, like, because with most game engines and most game frameworks, people have ported games to consoles, even if it's a very tedious process. It's a complicated process, but they do it. Especially with open source game engines, it's very possible for you to do it yourself, because you could actually just integrate elements of the console's SDK and just try to work with that. So the next one I'm going to talk about is Default. Um, this is another personal favorite of mine. It's 2D, mostly 2D. It's mostly a 2D game engine, and it runs on Lua. It can do 3D, but it's not built necessarily to be very capable for 3D, but it can handle 3D. But it's mostly oriented to 2D games. All right, and the good thing about Default, what makes it different from all the other open source game engines is that it's focused on two things majorly. It's focused on high performance games, so it's very suitable for mobile platforms, because the performance is very high and the binary is very lightweight. When you export, or when you sort of like export your games to mobile also and other platforms, it has a very low footprint for the size of the binary that you export, which is really amazing. But it's also very low level as an engine. Not exactly low engine. I mean the what I can say is that the tooling actually gives it a lot of what can I say? It makes it a lot easier to use. So it's a bit high level compared to other low level frameworks, or you're going game frameworks that you're going to see out there. So there's a question: which you choose to create a simple game like a role game. Anyway, we'll talk about that a bit. Which Okay, so that's a question. Okay, I'll get to it when I sort of like finish all the game engines that I'm covering. The other one I found that I can mention, but it's buggy, but it works still. Sometimes it has a few issues here and there. It's called O3DE. In between O3DE and Stride, I can definitely select Stride, right? But O3DE is also for Lua developers and visual scripting, right? And basically, it has a visual scripting environment which is very similar to Blueprints. Somehow they took some inspirations from Unreal Engine to some degree, but my experience of it has been quite sometimes buggy here and there. So it's really still trying to get a footing. So having talked about some of these game engines, the question is, which would you choose to create a simple game, like a role game? Okay, I mean, a role game, it depends if you're looking at a 2D game. A 2D game, definitely, it depends on your specifications. Do you want a game that is uh, the performance is better on mobile? Is it does a binary need to be small when you export it? Then you go for default, right? Or you can go for Godot. Godot is very capable on both 2D and 3D, right? My personal favorite is actually, out of all of them, is actually Godot engine, and it can do both 2D and 3D, right? If you're looking to do 3D, Godot engine is also my recommendation. It's mature, it's very well tested, and it's very intuitive. The tools are amazing. Or you can go for Stride, so that sort of thing. Um, let's cover now a bit about game frameworks. And game frameworks, you can majorly sort of like categorize them as per language. Now it's your preference what you want to go for, right? And because a lot of people basically use uh, Unity, they sort of like have a comfort level as C#. So that's the first one I'm going to cover. A very important C# game framework is Monogame itself as a game framework. I'm not going to talk about I'm not going to talk about like the details about some of these frameworks. I'm just going to cover the language mostly because there's not so much you can say about them because they're not feature rich. They're mostly just frameworks, right? So I'm going to cover them by language. The other one that is based on Lua, and the thing about Lua that I love about Lua is a very performant language. It's quite performant. Its performance is in terms of like in the gaming space, Lua is one of the best performing languages. Of course, C sharp performs quite well because it's compiled also. But in terms of like uh, Lua, and there's also something known as Lua GIT, which is a just-in-time compiled Lua. Sort of like Lua is very high performance in all the other alternative languages, right? Which is why also you find that the default engine is quite performant because of Lua itself. You have Love 2D as a framework, you have Solid 2D, you have Wicked Engine. Wicked Engine has a lot of tools in it. Solid 2D also has very good tooling to some degree, but it's still a framework. They don't have an IDE for it. But I mean, the one that's in this list that is very manual to deal with and very manual to work with is Love 2D. You have to do everything with Love 2D end to end. You have to build your game without any tooling support. I mean, you can, if you want to have it run mobile, you have to compile the mobile version of it with the game binary that's compiled. That's the result of the Love 2D compilation process on its own. So it's very manual, and you don't have any add-ons. Like you can't do stuff like ads and all that. Like you have to build that on your own end to end. But people have used it. Like Love 2D has some good successful titles, regardless, because some people love to be very manual end to end about everything. In this list, I personally have a very strong attachment at the moment to Solid 2D when it comes to this, because apart from the fact that, yes, it has basic tools to do this and that, it has a very strong plugin ecosystem that you can use for ads and all that. And it automates the process of actually publishing to different types of platforms, web, mobile, and desktop platforms. So it automates that process. And the coding is very intuitive on it. So the other language that we're going to cover is C++. And you're going to notice that Wicked is on both the C++ and the Lua category because it supports both. It's your choice. But Raylib is another upcoming framework. It's very low level. You have to do everything on your own also. And it doesn't have sophisticated features. So it's like the basic games you can do in 2D for Ray. You can use Raylib for that. SDL is a framework that's very interesting because it also gets embedded into a number of these other frameworks. Like Love to Do actually uses SDL at the very low level, and SDL handles multimedia, it handles audio, it handles different types of the typical stuff that you'd expect to have in a game, like input handling and all that. It's a library that can abstract a lot of those things for you. But people have come and put a lot of like stuff on top of it, like Lua interpreters and all that. So like you found that Love 2D uses it, and some other game frameworks, you're going to find that they use SDL, and they sort of like embed it into their game framework or game engine. Python, there's Pygame, which is mostly a 2D game and 2D game framework, and Panda 3D, which is self-explanatory, does 3D. It's good for 3D stuff. Python has the criticism of being a slow language, right? It's a slow language, so you're going to find that because it's interpreted, it's all that. It's not as fast as the other alternatives. So people just sort of like with PY Game and Panda 3, they don't go for serious AAA titles. They can do simple stuff with it, So and JavaScript, HTML5. There's a couple of frameworks here, right? But I'm going to cover some of the popular ones, and you're going to notice that. I mean, they are 3D game engines, but these game engines aren't like Play Canvas. It's not entirely open source. It's also a proprietary system in terms of its tooling. But these are like open source frameworks, and they work on the browser mostly. And folks who want to do desktop games with these frameworks, they sort of like embed it into, Electron, or if they want to do mobile games, they embed it into something known as Godot. I know you guys might have heard about, but there's a framework called Godot which you can use to create HTML5 apps for mobile, so they can abstract in that manner. It's not particularly efficient because the binaries that come out of that are also quite heavy. But I mean, for folks who are very oriented to HTML5 and all that, it's a great alternative. So finally, Java frameworks. There's two that stand out here. There's JMonkey Engine, which JMonkey Engine is actually both a game engine and a framework. It's up to you what you want to do with it. But I just put it here because it's mostly a framework compared to an engine. Mostly, I mean, we can argue about that also because they have the SDK, which is a complete tool, but the core is the game framework itself. It's for 3D games, and libgdx, which is quite good at 2D, can also do 3D, but primarily it's mostly being used for 2D games. And this is a surprising thing. People think that Java is not a good alternative for gaming because it's it runs on a VM. It's sort of like all people have this impression that it's quite a slow language because it runs on top of a VM. And shock on you, actually, comparisons that have made it actually as performant as C# itself. So like even like the games that have been developed by libgdx, some of them are quite performant. And so libgdx, in fact, as a framework, it's very hard to find a framework that is as holistic as libgdx in all these frameworks that I talked about, because libgdx has a lot of tooling support. It's just that it doesn't have an integrated environment to sort of like for you to visually tinker with your game and all that. Although some third-party providers are doing something simple around that, but the tooling for it just out of the box and what you can do with it and exporting to different types of platforms, it is very rich for a game framework. So this is like the end of the presentation. I'm guessing there'll be Q&A, right?
And I'm back. Thank you, Ahmed. I actually I was listening to all of that, and I think, and please comment below if you also was kind of surprised that there's so many of them, and even with JavaScript you can do something. So it's not like, oh, now I have to learn C++ or C#. And obviously, question to you, how first you stumbled or working this idea that I don't want to go through this typical route of real engine or something like that. I want to discover what Godot is about, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So the exact story behind that I can't remember, but I sort of read a lot online and all this stuff, and I was in forums and all these things. And one thing leads to another, like you either you're on Google, you're searching for stuff, or in forums and all that, and you get recommendations. So, so you start building knowledge based on that, like slowly you stumble on something, you sort of research on it, I tinker with it a bit somehow, try to understand its capability. and all that. There's a vast ocean of stuff out there, right? Obviously, the conventional engines like Unreal and Unity, they're quite, what can I say? They're quite ahead of the game, right? I mean, so many people are using it and all that, and the hit games coming out every day from those engines. It's just, it's overwhelming. And in fact, one of the challenges that a lot of these engines that you're going to see they face is the fact that sometimes some of them, have very little contribution. They're open source, and but for some of these that are featured, at least they've stood the test of time to some degree, right? And they're still surviving to date, and they're still pushing forward, right? But like, it's always that situation where one thing leads to another because you're in forums, you're reading about stuff, you're on Google trying to read about game technologies, and like it just you stumble on things and you make sure you bookmark them, and all that, and you make reference to them and you play around, try find out what the capabilities are. And this is just, in fact, if you're overwhelmed, there's actually a lot more. I've just filtered out some of the stuff that I think is like across all the categories, what I think is has stood the test of time, and maybe is for me my best selection in those areas, right? Some of them didn't make it. Some of them were commercial. They closed shop. Some of them like open sourced at a later stage, like Solar 2D Default. They open sourced at a later stage. And they were owned by very profitable companies. Default was under King at some moment in time, and then it was open source under Default Foundation. So there's so much going on, and some of it didn't make it. Some of it is out there, but I don't think it's it can compete with, in my opinion, the stuff that I've just presented right now in the various categories.
It's so true. There's so many stuff out there that you have to discover on your own, and it's not being talked about. For example, Alucard, he's grateful for this live stream, and he'd been learning game development as a hobby, primarily focusing on Unity. And this is where like question could arise: if I'm doing this as a hobby, like I have an idea for a small to do game, and do I need to focus on Unity? Maybe there's other.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. If you're going to get into game development for the purpose of career, like you don't want to come up with your own game, you want to just like you want to join a game studio and all that. Maybe focusing on conventional is a bad idea. Maybe, but Godot might have a future. That's a different thing. Slowly, Godot is starting to get adopted by even Raw Fury is using it for some of their titles at the moment, and they've become quite successful titles. Cassette Beasts, you're talking about wow, Dome Keeper, like these are Raw Fury titles that have become quite successful. So like Godot is slowly starting to get into the scene, right, as an engine,
Interesting.
and it's slowly starting to be adopted by even like serious publishers and serious organizations. Maybe if you want to go on conventional, Godot is a safe bet, right? If you're doing it for hobby, if you're sort of like you want to do your own game and all that, or you want to build something on your own, then where is your passion? Is your passion working with Lua? Is your passion working with Java? Is your passion working with a game engine? Is your passion to build stuff from scratch, even if it means you're writing low level C++ code, and stuff like that, and tinkering with game engines? People have different motivations, right? Some people love to work with the dirty stuff down there, right? And like get an engine like like Love 2D to work for them end to end, like, and they develop everything with with a lot of work, right, involved. Some people enjoy that. That's for you, like. So where's your passion? Which is your language? You know,
So,
um, do you
so you'd
love framework?
say,
Yeah.
yeah. So you'd
Are
say
you?
it would be easier if let's say you're a Java developer and you want just like dabble into development, game development, it would be easier to start with those platforms that already based on Java without you having those learning curve of C++, C sharp, and then trying to go to conventional route.
Yeah, it depends because some people pick languages very fast, right? Some people are actually like, for me,
True,
like with Godot engine, like GDScript, great. Even I've done, and GDScript is very simple to Python, like very similar to Python, sorry. And I've done Python back in the day. So like it was for me, I learn the language because I love the tool. That's me. Some
true,
people they love the language and they're going to select a tool. You know, so like
true.
if you're a Java developer, like you could go with JMonk, you could go with libgdx. You know, you're a Lua developer, you have options. You're a C sharp developer, you're quite lucky. Like there's so many options out there for you. So so stuff like that.
We have a question from Gabriel, and he's asking if mobile or Windows game, which would be good to hobby?
Again, what is your passion? I'm always going to say that. What is your passion? For some people, they love to do desktop games, and there's a reason
Hmm.
why Steam is thriving. Steam is thriving not for
True.
mobile; it's thriving for PC, right? Some people they love the simple mobile experiences, and they love to tinker with things on mobile. What do you want to do? Where's your passion? What do you love to do, right? I mean, I can't answer that question for you because it's on a case to case basis. Some people, I mean, but I can say this: if you're looking for mass market adoption and probably making money out of ads and stuff like that, then definitely go for mobile, right? Because mobile is
Hmm.
mass, right? You're looking for console. Look for an engine that can support console. Godot engine at the moment doesn't support console, but people have ported games to console, and there are organizations that focus on console, and they've just registered an organization as the founders of Godot Engine, which is now going to focus also on console porting to consoles, right? So it has a future in consoles, right? So, but you're going to find that for consoles, you have two options. You can go with the conventional technologies, or you can decide uh, you'll select a technology. Even Love 2D has also done console games,
Hmm.
So,
True.
but you're going to have to get dirty with everything because even like dealing with console SDKs is a very tough thing to do, and it's not for the faint-hearted. And you have to also sign NDAs and like so much licensing. I mean, there's so much money you're gonna spend on licenses and all that stuff. So it's really, you know, so many factors go into this. To be honest, you know,
True. But the first of all, go with your passion. And
always say go with
your
passion.
yeah, and your end goal. This is really good point. Like if you want to, let's say, make money from what you're trying to achieve, it's one thing. If you really want to dive and discover something interesting in open source, it's another thing. Where if you really love Steam and want to see your game on Steam just because, it's another thing. There's another question from Alan Cart. What about asset compatibility in non-conventional engines?
Yeah, so I understand your question because you're talking about the fact that Unity and Unreal have asset stores, right? Uh, I mean, the asset store in Unity and Unreal is very good with integrating with the engine. You know, there are two scenarios for assets in the unconventional engines, right? And it's that like you can do your assets, or you can download assets. You can download assets that can work on Unity. You can download assets that can work on any game engine. That is possible also. Or you can develop assets that can work across the board, isn't it? I mean, the asset. I can say the asset creation process is the same up to a point where they now customize it to work on Unity, or they customize it to work with Unreal or stuff like that. But at the core, the assets are the same. So if you like are able to work with the asset pipeline to a specific degree, you can achieve it. And I think if you go with Blender, as a if you're doing 3D games, you're always safe, especially with Godot engine, also with default, which is just a 2D but can do 3D to some degree. The formats that Blender can export for 3D assets, you're going to find that a lot of these unconventional game engines can also work with one or two of those formats that are popular. A Godot engine can work with Blender pretty well, and like it can work with 2D assets pretty well. It's just that it's not packaged for Unity or stuff like that. It's just like I mean, assets are its own topic. Maybe we're gonna have a lot of series of talks over a couple of like items like this in the future, because like all these questions you guys are asking are very diverse and deep questions, which can have their own exploration.
That is
Yeah,
that is true that I'm seeing that. First of all, it's like even the gaming development process itself, what it concludes, where it starts and where it ends. So it's not just like I want to learn this.
yeah,
It's more broad. Um, but I also would like to mention that from my perspective, games are also really interesting way of learning to code. And I would love to mention
yeah,
your project that you recently showed to us,
yeah,
which is fun visual coding environment that you can use to customize game elements and learn a thing or two about how coding works, which is quite interesting. I'm showing you the link so you can all check it out and discover. And can you tell us about this for a little bit?
yeah. So this is a funny thing. Someone like when they discovered I did this project on Godot engine, they were like, "You use the game engine to develop a game engine." I'm like, "No, it doesn't work like that, because the Godot engine itself, the visual environment for Godot engine is actually built on top of Godot engine itself. It's a long topic, and you have to understand how the Godot engine core works from the code perspective. But like actually, like the when you download Godot engine and you open the editor, actually that editor was developed on top of Godot engine itself. So it's a complicated topic. Anyway, so I don't know how to explain this for layman's terms, but like I sort of like use Godot engine to come up with an engine like this. And what it is, it's actually I'm targeting in the future capabilities for it to be a storytelling platform, right? And it has a visual environment, like which is it's you put nodes together, you connect them in some ways, very similar to blueprints in some ways, not exactly, but like you can use it to teach yourself how to code also. The use case is not just for storytelling. The use case is that you can use it for education. You can like come up with very simple like games just for fun and all that. It's still a product under development, so I'm anticipating to put in a lot of more features and functionalities for it. But it's reached a point where people can tinker with it, and like they can use it to also understand how coding works, like kids and all that. And they can understand how coding works on a visual level. So that sort of thing. So any
Yeah,
before we proceed,
there's another question from
yeah,
Gabriel that if if you know or recommend any course or book that someone can learn on how to create assets for the game.
yeah. I'd recommend keeping an eye out on two websites, Humble Bundle and Fanatical. They always have books time and again, and some of those books cover asset creation, all that. So always keep an eye out on. They have deals coming up, and also like you could buy those books if you want on those websites without the deals, right? So always pay attention to that. Even like you can also go to what's this, Udemy? Is it Udemy? Uh, Udemy, yeah, Udemy. You can go to Udemy. There's a couple of courses on things like if you're a 2D developer, pixel art, or like sprites, how to develop 2D art, right? Um, and I would recommend take courses that are generic. Don't take courses that lock you to a game engine. Then you become just because if you can develop generic assets, they can work for any game engine, even Unity. All right. So Blender is a good tool to learn. Blender has a couple of courses for 3D developers. All right. And you go for like things like pixel art or 2D art and stuff like that. So yeah, stuff like that.
And obviously, worth to mention that I'm pointing out Ahmed's LinkedIn, where you can add him. And if you have any further questions or any curiosity, or discover his path and discover his gaming projects, you can check him on LinkedIn, Ahmed Maawy. And I think this subject has a lot of sub themes to discover. And we obviously will talk with Ahmed to see if we want to create a series of subtopics for it. And depending on Ahmed's availability, I think it was an awesome thing to cover and for a lot of us to discover new things aside from
And I,
Unreal Engine.
and it would be a good idea for also like guys to suggest if they want to dive into specific topics and we cover them more.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, that's something.
What
Yeah,
I've
you can
noticed from kind of similarity of the question is if it's like a hobby and starting out, like for someone who is
yeah,
only starting to discover this uh, passion for them. And actually,
yeah,
it's a good way of thinking because I think a lot of people, when they start this, they just go for the simple route of, okay, I know that Unreal is for gaming, so let me learn this, because they didn't even question themselves of what purpose they want to achieve. So I think it's really
yeah.
interesting point that you mentioned about passion and what they actually like to do, and if it's a learning curve for them and learning opportunity, if it's just passing for 30 minutes or so after work. So it really depends. And I love how Gabriel is saying, I play violin, I have good understanding about music, but sucks about assets.
You can always be something known as an audio engineer, right? There's, I mean, audio assets are also assets. So,
Exactly.
in actual sense,
Exactly.
yeah.
So Ahmed, I really appreciate for you to taking your time from your day-to-day and heavily booked calendar to talk a little bit more about your passion, and which is unconventional games. And of course, if you have more questions, please reach out to Xteam on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and reach out to Ahmed on his LinkedIn profile. I think he'll be more welcoming to answer any questions that you have. And thank you very much for joining us today and spending your time to listen to this interesting topic. And have a blessed one.